The rain against the glass was the only sound that felt real, a soft, relentless tapping that counted the seconds of my new life. In the guest room, the air was thick, heavy with the scent of her perfume, a floral note I couldn't name, now tangled with the salt of our skin and the undeniable musk of what we had just done. She was asleep, or pretending to be, her breathing a slow, even rhythm beside me. Maya. Her name was a foreign country on my tongue, a place I had only just visited but knew I could never truly leave. Her dark hair was fanned out across the pillow, the same silk as Olivia's, but it was the differences that screamed at me in the quiet. The single silver earring she never took off, the faint scent of clove cigarettes that clung to her clothes, now discarded on the floor. She was my wife's sister, and she was asleep in a bed just down the hall from the room where my wife was probably, at this very moment, taking off the dress she had bought specially for tonight. Our 10th anniversary. From downstairs, I could hear the faint, muffled echo of music, the last ghost of the party we had thrown. Laughter, thin and distant, a sound from another world, another lifetime. Olivia would be down there, the perfect hostess to the last, thanking our final friends for coming, her smile as warm and genuine as the life we had built. A life I had just set on fire. I shifted, the sheets sticking to my back, and my eyes fell on the nightstand. There, beside a half-empty glass of water, sat a small, blue velvet box. The necklace I had bought for Olivia. 10 diamonds for 10 years. It sat there like a judge, a silent, glittering accusation. I felt a wave of nausea so profound it almost buckled me in two. What had I done? It wasn't a question, it was a statement. A final, irreversible fact. I looked back at the woman beside me, at the curve of her shoulder, so painfully familiar, so achingly different. For a decade, my world had been a quiet, comfortable heaven built around one woman. And in the space of a few stolen hours, under my own roof, on the one night meant to celebrate that heaven, I had willingly dragged us all into this specific, suffocating hell. The rain kept falling, washing nothing clean. Before the rain, before the scent of guilt became the only air I could breathe, there was the sun. There was Olivia. To understand the depth of the fall, you have to understand the height from which I fell. Our life, the one we built over 10 years, wasn't a lie. That is the cruelest part of this whole story. It was real, it was beautiful, and it was, I thought, everything I would ever need. I remember the first years in this city, in a cramped apartment that always smelled of damp earth and fresh paint. We were artists of our own small world, painting a future with broad, confident strokes. Our love was a physical thing, a language spoken in tangled limbs on a too-small mattress, in spontaneous road trips with no destination, in whispers and laughter that filled every empty space. Olivia was my anchor and my sails. Her laugh could silence the nagging doubts in my mind, the ones that told me an architect with big dreams was just another cliché. Her touch, the specific way her fingers would trace the lines on my palm, felt like coming home. We were a team, a fortress of two against the world, and we won. Slowly, inevitably, we won. My design started selling. The cramped apartment became a down payment on this house, a place with clean lines and wide windows that let in the soft gray Seattle light. We filled it with tasteful furniture, with books we intended to read, with the comfortable silence of a shared life. Our love story didn't end. It simply matured. It became a different kind of love, a quieter, more dependable vintage. The frantic passion of our 20s mellowed into the deep, unspoken understanding of our 30s. It was a love expressed in the way I made her coffee every morning, exactly how she liked it, and the way she'd leave a novel on my bedside table, open to a page she thought I would enjoy. It was the synchronized rhythm of our evenings, a shared meal, a show we both halfway watched, the soft, dutiful kiss on her forehead before we turned away from each other to sleep. It was perfect, stable, secure, and somewhere, in the deepest part of my soul, it had begun to feel like a beautiful, exquisitely crafted cage. I had everything a man was supposed to want, and the terrifying, secret truth was that I was suffocating on the flawless, predictable air inside it. The silence was no longer filled with anticipation, but with the quiet hum of the refrigerator. The fortress for two had become so secure that nothing new could ever get in. And then Maya arrived. She blew into our pristine, orderly life like a gust of wind, scattering a carefully arranged pile of leaves. Olivia had been ecstatic for weeks, planning her younger sister's visit, a trip to celebrate our anniversary with us. I remembered Maya as a teenager, all sharp angles and sarcastic remarks. I wasn't prepared for the woman who stood on our doorstep. She looked like she had been poured into her faded jeans and worn leather jacket. Her hair was a darker shade than Olivia's, an untamed cascade of waves that she was constantly pushing out of her eyes. And her eyes, they were the same shape as my wife's, but where Olivia's held a calm, gentle warmth, Maya's held a restless, searching fire. She dropped a scuffed duffel bag on our polished hardwood floor, grinned a wide, unapologetic smile, and hugged her sister with a fierce energy that seemed to shake the quiet in the room. Olivia fussed over her, taking her coat, asking a dozen questions about her trip, her life. The latest drama I knew was never far from Maya. I stood back, an observer, and felt a jolt, a low-voltage shock to a system that had been in sleep mode for years. Her presence changed the very atmosphere of our home. That first night, at the dinner table, the conversation was no longer about interest rates or a colleague's retirement party. Maya spoke of backpacking through Thailand, of a bartending job in New Orleans she'd quit on a whim, of a love affair with a musician that had crashed and burned in spectacular fashion. Her stories were messy, unstructured, and vibrantly alive. Olivia listened with a mixture of sisterly concern and amusement. I listened and felt an envy so sharp it tasted like acid. She lived without a map, and I had a 10-year plan. She was chaos, and I was order. Olivia saw her beloved, wayward little sister. I saw a reflection of every impulsive decision I'd never made, every risk I had been too sensible to take. Later that evening, as Maya was telling a particularly funny story about a lost passport, her eyes met mine across the table. It was only for a second, but it wasn't just a glance. There was a flicker of something else in her gaze, a raw curiosity, an assessment. It was the look of someone who sees not just the calm surface, but wonders about the currents running underneath. That night, lying in the familiar comfort of my bed, with Olivia's steady breathing beside me, the house was finally quiet again. But my mind was not. It was loud, buzzing with a new, dangerous frequency. The fortress had been breached. The days that followed Maya's arrival were a study in subtle disruption. Our home, once a sanctuary of quiet predictability, now had a new, unpredictable frequency humming within its walls. It was in the little things. The scent of her shampoo, something wild and spicy, lingering in the hallway long after her morning shower. The sound of her boots on the hardwood floor at 2 a.m. as she came in from a walk, a stark contrast to the soft shuffle of Olivia's slippers. A half-finished book of poetry left face down on my drafting table, its cover a provocative splash of color against my monochrome blueprints. Olivia saw these as charming eccentricities, the lovable chaos of her baby sister. She would laugh, picking up a stray coffee mug. "That's my Maya," she'd say, a statement of fond exasperation. I would smile and agree, but in my chest, something else was happening. I wasn't charmed. I was captivated. I became a secret observer, a thief of stolen glances. I learned the way she'd tuck a strand of hair behind her ear when she was concentrating on her laptop, revealing a tattoo of a tiny, intricate bird just below her hairline. I learned the rhythm of her laugh, a husky, uninhibited sound that was so different from Olivia's light, melodic one. I found myself watching her hands as she talked, how expressive they were, her fingers long and her nails unpainted. These were dangerous observations, cataloged in a secret ledger in my mind, each entry a small, silent betrayal. My perception of my own life began to warp. The comfortable silence I used to share with Olivia started to feel empty. The routines that had once been a source of stability now felt like ruts. One evening, the three of us were on the sofa, watching some mindless thriller. Olivia was nestled against me, her head on my shoulder, her familiar, comforting weight a part of me. Maya was curled up on the other end of the large sectional, feet tucked underneath her. I was acutely aware of her, more so than the movie or the woman in my arms. The light from the screen flickered across her face, and I watched the play of shadows on her skin. I could smell the faint scent of wine on her breath from across the cushions. I started to dissect my attraction, to rationalize it. It wasn't love. My love was for Olivia, a deep, foundational certainty. This thing with Maya was different. It was a purely aesthetic appreciation, I told myself. It was an architect admiring a different kind of structure, one with dangerous curves and unpredictable angles. While I loved Olivia as a whole, a complete and perfect entity, I found myself objectifying Maya, breaking her down into a collection of irresistible parts. Her mouth, the way her lower lip was just slightly fuller than the top one, the long, elegant line of her throat when she tilted her head back, the curve of her hip, clearly defined in the soft denim of her jeans. It was a clinical, detached inventory, yet it made my heart beat faster. It was the beginning of a fever. The turning point, the moment the unspoken became a shared current between us, happened on a Tuesday. It was raining, of course, a steady, hypnotic drizzle that blurred the world outside the kitchen window. Olivia had gone for a long run, wrapped in waterproof gear, a discipline I both admired and, for the first time, felt grateful for. It left Maya and me alone in the house. The silence she left behind was different from our usual quiet. It was charged, filled with possibility. Maya was making coffee, moving around the space with a restless grace. I was leaning against the counter, nursing my own mug. The small talk about the weather and our plans for the day eventually faded away. She turned to me, her expression serious. "Does it ever get boring?" she asked, her voice low. I feigned ignorance. "What? The rain?" She gave a small, knowing smile. "Number. This," she said, making a vague gesture that encompassed the pristine kitchen, the quiet house, the life I had built, the perfection. Don't you ever just want to design something useless and wild? Something that makes no sense but is beautiful just because it exists? The question landed like a perfectly aimed stone, shattering the placid surface of my composure. It was a question no one ever asked. People saw my success, my beautiful wife, my perfect home, and they assumed I was content. They never saw the cage. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time, I felt seen. I found myself telling her about a design I'd sketched in college, a cantilevered house that defied gravity, impossibly perched on the edge of a cliff. It was impractical, expensive, and structurally insane. It was the most honest thing I had ever designed, and it was buried in a portfolio in the attic. As I spoke, I felt a part of myself I thought had died long ago stir back to life. She listened intently, her eyes never leaving mine. The space between us seemed to shrink, the air growing warmer, thicker. "You should build it," she whispered, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. I laughed, a hollow sound. Olivia would kill me. I meant it as a joke, but it came out sounding like an excuse, a confession of my own cowardice. I turned to pour myself more coffee, needing to put some distance between us. As I reached for the pot, she reached for her mug on the counter, and our hands brushed. It was nothing, a fleeting contact of skin on skin, but it was everything. A jolt of pure electricity, white hot and stunning, shot up my arm. It was a shocking, illicit warmth in the sterile comfort of my life. We both recoiled instantly, our eyes locking for a heartbeat too long. In that silent, breathless moment, the truth was laid bare. We both knew. The shared curiosity had just ignited into a shared desire. The sound of Olivia's key turning in the front door was like a gunshot, and we sprang apart, two guilty conspirators, the damning evidence of our near transgression hanging invisibly in the air between us. The night of the party arrived, cloaked in a deceptive beauty. Our house, usually a temple of minimalist quiet, was transformed. It pulsed with life, with the warm glow of dozens of candles and the low thrum of music weaving through the conversations of our friends. Laughter echoed off the high ceilings. The air smelled of expensive wine, Olivia's favorite stargazer lilies, and the collective perfume of 50 people celebrating our life. And at the center of it all was Olivia, a vision in a simple, elegant silver dress. She moved through the crowd with an effortless grace, Her smile, a beacon of genuine happiness that made my chest ache with a love so profound it felt like a sickness. I was the other half of the portrait, standing beside her, my arm around her waist, playing the part of the devoted, successful husband. I smiled until my face hurt. I accepted congratulations on a decade of happiness, my mouth forming words of gratitude while my mind was a raging sea of hypocrisy. I felt like an imposter at my own triumph, a ghost haunting the edges of my own life. Every handshake, every toast, every shared laugh felt like a lie I was telling to the world, and most of all, to the radiant woman by my side. My senses were strangely dulled to the scene around me. The faces of our friends blurred into a single smiling monolith. My entire being was an antenna, tuned to one specific signal, scanning the crowded rooms for her. And then I would see her, Maya. She had chosen a simple dark green dress, a slip of silk that clung to her in a way that was both elegant and profoundly sensual. It was a departure from her usual armor of denim and leather, and the effect was devastating. It didn't tame her wildness. It framed it, made it seem even more potent in contrast. I became a hunter. My eyes tracked her as she moved through the living room, a glass of champagne in her hand, laughing with a group of my colleagues. I watched the way the candlelight caught the sharp line of her collarbone, the way she tilted her head when she listened, her dark hair cascading over a bare shoulder. An ugly, primitive possessiveness coiled in my gut when I saw another man lean in too close to hear her speak. I wanted to cross the room and pull her away. The thought was so sudden, so violent, it shocked me. To ground myself, I drank. The wine, a deep and expensive red that our guests were praising, became my fuel and my shield. Each glass was a layer of insulation between the man I was supposed to be and the man I was becoming. The alcohol didn't numb the guilt. It sharpened my desire, burning away the edges of my conscience until only the wanting was left, clear and hard as a diamond. Eventually, the heat and the noise of the house became suffocating. I murmured an excuse to Olivia, who was deep in conversation with her parents, and slipped out the back door into the garden. The night air was cool and damp, a welcome shock to my system. The sounds of the party became a dull, distant roar. I stood on the wet flagstones, breathing in the scent of damp earth and roses, trying to steady myself. A few moments later, the door slid open and shut. It was Maya. She didn't say anything at first, just stood beside me, looking up at the sliver of moon visible between the clouds. "You looked like you needed to escape," she said finally, her voice low and soft, a stark contrast to the party's noise. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Something like that. We stood in a comfortable silence for a moment, a silence that felt more intimate than any conversation I'd had all night. "Are you happy, Ethan?" she asked. Her question so direct it felt like a physical touch. I looked at her. Her face was illuminated by the soft light spilling from the kitchen window, and her eyes were searching mine. "I have a beautiful life," I said, the answer practiced and hollow even to my own ears. She held my gaze. "That's not what I asked." And there it was, the same sharp perception from the kitchen, the ability to see past the facade. I felt a dangerous urge to confess everything, to tell her about the beautiful cage, the quiet desperation. Instead, I just shook my head slowly. "It's complicated." Her hand came up and rested on my arm, a fleeting, reassuring touch. "It always is," she whispered. The warmth of her fingers seeped through the fabric of my shirt, a small point of heat that spread through my entire body. We went back inside, the unspoken truth of our garden conversation hanging between us. The party had thinned a little, the energy mellowing. And then the music shifted. A slow, melancholic ballad began to play. I saw Olivia across the room, smiling, caught in a story with an old friend. My feet moved before my brain could stop them. I crossed the room to where Maya was standing near the fireplace. I didn't say a word. I just held out my hand. She looked at my hand, then up at my face, and a slow smile touched her lips. She placed her hand in mine. As I led her to the small area people had cleared for dancing, I felt 100 pairs of eyes on us, but I didn't care. They saw nothing. A man dancing with his sister-in-law at a family party. They couldn't see the truth. The moment my other hand rested on the small of her back, The world contracted to the space between our two bodies. I felt the warmth of her skin through the thin silk, a shocking, electrifying heat. I pulled her closer until her front was flush against mine. Her scent, that wild, spicy perfume mixed with wine, filled my head, an intoxicating poison. We moved slowly to the music, perfectly in sync, as if we had been dancing together our entire lives. Her arms went around my neck, her fingers cool against my skin. Our faces were inches apart. I could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. I could feel her soft breath on my lips. The emotional affair was no longer a question. It was a statement, a consummation in the middle of the crowded room. We were saying everything without saying a word. The song ended. We pulled apart slowly, reluctantly. The spell wasn't broken. It was sealed. And as I looked into her eyes, I knew with a terrifying absolute certainty that the dance was only the beginning. The night was not over. The front door clicked shut on the last laughing guests, and a profound silence descended upon the house. It was a heavy, weighted, quiet, thick, with everything that had been left unsaid between us. The rooms were a beautiful disaster zone, a landscape of empty glasses, discarded napkins, and the sweet, cloying scent of dying flowers and spilled wine. Olivia, radiant to the very end, leaned against me, her body pliant with a happy exhaustion. She kissed me, a soft, trusting press of her lips that felt like a brand of shame on my soul. "Thank you for the perfect night, my love," she murmured, her voice sleepy. 10 more years. She smiled, a smile of absolute faith, before turning and making her way slowly up the grand staircase, each step taking her further away, leaving me alone in the battlefield with my co-conspirator. I watched until she disappeared from view, the sound of our bedroom door closing upstairs echoing like a gunshot in the cavernous silence. And then there were two. I turned and faced Maya. She was standing by the fireplace, one hand tracing the rim of a forgotten wine glass. We were caught in a bubble of suspended time, the air crackling with the static of our shared secret. The dance, the garden, the glances, it had all led to this single, inevitable moment. We began the absurd theater of cleaning up. I gathered glasses, my hands unsteady. She started stacking plates, her movements jerky and deliberate. We moved around the kitchen island like two planets in a careful opposing orbit, never touching, never speaking, the space between us a powerful magnetic void. The clinking of glass was deafening. The sound of the running water from the faucet was a roar. I could hear my own heart, a frantic, trapped bird beating against my ribs. I placed a stack of glasses by the sink, and the sound of them touching the granite countertop made her jump. She stopped what she was doing. I stopped what I was doing. I looked up, and she was already looking at me. Her eyes, dark and wide in the dim light, were filled with a terrifying mixture of fear and surrender. That was all it took. The charade was over. The fragile dam of my restraint, eroded all week by a relentless current of desire, finally broke. In 3 long strides, I was across the kitchen. I didn't say her name. I didn't have to. I put my hands on her waist, and it was like touching an open flame. She let out a small, sharp gasp, a sound that was half protest, half invitation. And then I kissed her. It was not a kiss of tenderness. It was a kiss of desperation, of starvation. It was a collision, a frantic, brutal claiming. Her lips parted under mine, and her taste was wine and smoke and a unique, intoxicating flavor that was all her own. Her hands came up, not to push me away, but to tangle in my hair, pulling me closer, her nails scraping my scalp. We stumbled from the kitchen into the living room, a tangle of limbs and desperate mouths, knocking into a side table and sending a stack of magazines scattering across the floor. I pushed her back against the large sofa, the one where Olivia and I watched movies, the very heart of our shared domestic life. The sacrilege of the location was a distant, secondary thought, drowned out by the roaring in my blood. The thin straps of her green dress gave way under my clumsy, urgent fingers. I pushed the silk down, bearing her to the waist, and I saw her. For the first time, I saw her. Her breasts were full and pale in the slivers of moonlight filtering through the large windows, the nipples hard and dark. She was more beautiful and more real than my fevered imagination had ever allowed. A strangled sound, a mix of awe and guilt, escaped my throat. My hands, my mouth were everywhere. I was a man dying of thirst, and she was the oasis. I tasted the salt on her skin, learned the curve of her waist, the soft swell of her stomach. Her response was just as frantic. She tore at the buttons of my shirt, her touch urgent and searing. The sound of fabric ripping was a stark, violent punctuation in the quiet room. Our breathing was ragged, a shared, desperate rhythm. The air was filled with the rustle of clothing being discarded, the soft, wet sounds of our kisses, the whisper of skin on skin. "Ethan," she breathed. My name, a desperate prayer against my mouth. I pushed her down onto the sofa cushions, her dark hair a stark contrast against the light-colored fabric. I was between her legs, the heat of her core a palpable magnetic force. I entered her in one swift, desperate motion. We both cried out, a muffled sound of pain and pleasure and the sheer, overwhelming shock of the moment. We moved together with a frantic, unpracticed rhythm, a desperate attempt to get closer than physically possible. I gripped her hips, pulling her against me, again and again. She arched her back, her head thrown back, her moans now small, desperate whimpers she tried to stifle against my shoulder. In those moments, there was no past, no future. There was no Olivia sleeping upstairs. There was only this heat, this friction, this all-consuming, world-ending pleasure. The release, when it came, was a violent, shuddering wave that convulsed through both of us, a blinding white light that left us shattered and breathless in its wake. And then, silence. A silence more profound and terrifying than the one that had come before. The frantic energy vanished, sucked out of the room, leaving a vacuum of cold, hard reality. I was collapsed on top of her, my face buried in her hair, my body slick with sweat. I could feel the frantic, fading beat of her heart against my chest. The mundane sounds of the house rushed back in, the low hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, the soft, relentless patter of the rain against the glass. The weight of what I had done, of what we had done, descended on me like a physical shroud, suffocating me. I slowly, carefully, pulled away from her. We lay on the sofa, tangled in our discarded clothes and our shared shame, not looking at each other. The moonlight painted a cruel, revealing stripe across the room, illuminating the wreckage of the party, the evidence of our sin. I risked a glance at her. Her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, glistening with unshed tears. There was no pleasure left on her face, only a dawning, hollowed-out horror that I knew was a perfect mirror of my own. We had done it, and upstairs, my wife, the center of my world, was sleeping the peaceful, innocent sleep of the betrayed. Sleep was an impossible country, a distant land I no longer had a passport for. After Maya slipped away from the living room, a silent ghost vanishing up the stairs, I was left alone in the aftermath. I didn't follow. I couldn't. I remained on the sofa, the scene of the crime, as the last embers in the fireplace died and the room grew cold. The air, which hours ago had been thick with the heat of our transgression, was now thin and sharp, smelling of stale wine and my own cowardice. I sat there as the black of night slowly diluted into a bruised, unforgiving gray. The first light of dawn crept through the windows, a merciless illuminator, revealing the full extent of the desecration. It wasn't just the scattered magazines or the empty glasses, it was the space itself. The sofa, our sofa, was now a monument to my betrayal. I felt a desperate, insane urge to scrub the cushions, to burn them, to erase the memory of her skin against the fabric. My own skin felt alien, crawling with the phantom touch of her hands, the ghost of her lips on my neck. My mind was a torture chamber. One moment, it would project an image of Olivia's face, her loving, trusting smile as she'd said goodnight, and a wave of self-loathing so powerful would wash over me that I'd feel physically ill. Then, unbidden, another image would flash behind my eyes. The pale curve of Maya's back in the moonlight, the sound of her sharp intake of breath as I first touched her, the blinding, world-ending oblivion of the climax. The guilt and the memory of pleasure were at war inside me, and the conflict was tearing me apart. I was disgusted by what I had done, and a dark, treacherous part of me was electrified by it. I hadn't felt this alive, this terrified, in a decade. Eventually, the fear of discovery propelled me into action. With the careful, precise movements of a criminal cleaning a crime scene, I began to erase the evidence. I gathered every last glass, rinsing them and placing them in the dishwasher with unnerving quiet. I picked up the magazines, arranging them back into a perfect, neat stack. I plumped the cushions on the sofa, trying to smooth out the deep impressions our bodies had left. I was trying to restore order, to pretend that the chaos had never happened, that the foundation of our home had not just been irrevocably cracked. By the time the sun was fully up, the living room looked pristine, almost sterile. It looked normal, and that was the most terrifying thing of all. I was standing in the kitchen, staring into a cup of black coffee. I had no intention of drinking when I heard her footsteps on the stairs. It was Olivia. She entered the kitchen with a bright, well-rested smile, her face free of the torment that had ravaged mine all night. She was wrapped in her favorite silk robe, her hair tied back, the very picture of domestic peace. "Wow," she said, looking past me into the living room. "You were busy this morning. It looks amazing." "Thank you, honey." The casual, loving words were like tiny, sharp needles piercing my skin. She came over and kissed my cheek, her lips warm against my cold skin. "I slept like a log," she said, pulling out the coffee pot. "Best sleep I've had in weeks." Then, a second set of footsteps, slower, more hesitant. Maya appeared in the doorway. She was wearing an oversized t-shirt and shorts. Her hair was a mess, and there were dark circles under her eyes that even Olivia's oblivious happiness couldn't miss. "Oh, sweetie, you look exhausted," Olivia said, her voice full of sisterly concern. Maya just shrugged, avoiding my eyes, and mumbled something about not sleeping well in new places. The air in the kitchen became instantly charged, a thick, unbreathable miasma of tension that only 2 of the 3 people present could feel. The breakfast that followed was the longest hour of my life. It was a masterclass in psychological torture. Olivia, the blissful conductor of this nightmare orchestra, chattered on about the party. Who came, who said what, how beautiful the flowers were, how delicious the cake was. She was reliving a memory that I had poisoned. Maya and I were silent participants, our bodies rigid, our focus intense on the mundane tasks of buttering toast and sipping juice. We were 2 actors in a terrible play, forced to perform normalcy while our world burned down around us. We passed the salt shaker, our fingers nearly brushing, and we both flinched as if from an electric shock. I risked a glance at her. Her face was a pale, emotionless mask, her knuckles white as she gripped her coffee mug. The inevitable question came, as I knew it must. Olivia turned to me, her expression open and innocent. "So what time did you 2 finally get to bed? You must have been up for ages cleaning after I went up." The simple query hung in the air, a spotlight swinging around to find its target. I felt Maya tense beside me. The world seemed to slow down. I could hear the buzz of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, the sound of my own blood in my ears. I had to speak. I had to build the first wall in the labyrinth of lies I would now have to navigate for the rest of my life. I cleared my throat, the sound unnaturally loud. "No, not too late," I heard myself say, my voice a stranger's. Maya was tired, so we just did a quick pass and called it a night. The lie felt clumsy and foreign in my mouth, like a poorly translated phrase. It was small, insignificant, but it was foundational. It was the first stone laid on the grave of my honesty. I chanced to look at Olivia. She accepted it without a flicker of suspicion, already moving on to ask Maya what she wanted to do with her day. I looked at Maya. For a fraction of a second, her eyes met mine, and in their depths, I saw a reflection of my own despair, a shared understanding of the cage we had just built for ourselves. Later that morning, I watched as Olivia gave her sister a long, warm hug in the hallway. The sight of my wife's arms wrapped around the woman whose scent was still on my skin, whose touch was a brand on my memory, was a new and exquisite form of agony. I was a traitor, and this was only the first morning. The lie about Maya's car was a masterpiece of spontaneous, collaborative fiction. She'd made a show of trying to start it, the engine turning over with a pathetic, sickly whine. I played my part, peering under the hood with the feigned expertise of a man who knew nothing about mechanics, proclaiming it was likely the alternator. Olivia, ever the caring sister, insisted Maya stay until it could be fixed. "Don't be silly. You can't take a bus. You'll stay with us." "It's no trouble at all," she had said, her kindness a sharper torture than any accusation. And so, Maya stayed. The reprieve I had foolishly hoped for was denied. The danger was not banished. It was now a house guest with an indefinite checkout date. The day she was supposed to leave came and went, a ghost of a possibility. The awkward tension of that first morning after the party dissipated, replaced by something far more dangerous, a quiet, simmering anticipation. We had crossed a line, and now we lived on the other side, two citizens of a secret country, waiting for the cover of darkness, or in this case, the mundane routine of a weekday. The next morning, the ritual of Olivia leaving for work felt like the prelude to a ceremony. Her kiss goodbye was light, a normal peck on the cheek. Her "have a good day, honey. Don't let your sister drive you too crazy," was delivered with a cheerful, unsuspecting smile. The click of the front door closing was a starting pistol. I stood in the hallway, listening to her car pull out of the driveway, the sound fading into the distance. And then, silence. But this was not the empty silence of a house at peace. It was the charged, humming silence of a vacuum waiting to be filled. I knew she was upstairs. I knew she was waiting. I went into my office and sat at my drafting table, pretending to work. I stared at the clean, precise lines of a blueprint for a suburban library, a monument to order and civic peace. But my mind was not there. It was upstairs. Every creak of the floorboards above me was a signal. I heard the sound of her bedroom door opening. I heard the water start in the master bathroom. Our bathroom. The one I shared with Olivia. The sheer audacity of it, the violation of it, sent a sickening, exhilarating jolt through me. This was not going to be a frantic, guilty fumble on the sofa. This was a conscious decision. This was a desecration. I pushed back my chair, the sound scraping loudly in the quiet house. I walked out of my office and ascended the stairs, each step a deliberate, weighty choice. There was no hesitation. The man who had sat paralyzed by guilt on the sofa 2 nights ago was gone, replaced by a man driven by a singular, obsessive need. I was an addict walking toward his fix. The door to our bedroom was open. The ensuite bathroom door was slightly ajar, steam curling out from the opening like a spectral hand, beckoning me in. I pushed it open. The room was thick with steam, the large mirror completely fogged over, and through the glass door of the shower, I could see her silhouette, a hazy, feminine shape under the rushing water. She turned as I entered, her face obscured by the condensation, but I knew she was looking at me. There was no surprise in her posture, no shock. There was only a quiet, patient expectation. Wordlessly, I began to undress. My eyes locked on her form. My clothes fell to the floor, a pile of my former self. As I slid the glass door open, the heat and the sound of the water enveloped me. I stepped inside, and the world outside the glass disappeared. There was only the hot water, the thick steam, and her. This was different. The frantic desperation of our first encounter was gone, replaced by a slow, deliberate confidence. I reached out and turned her to face me. My hands began a slow, reverent exploration, as if memorizing a sacred text. I traced the line of her collarbone, the curve of her shoulders, the dip of her spine. I leaned in, my mouth finding the pulse that beat at the base of her throat, tasting the water on her skin. I slid my hands down her stomach and around her hips, pulling her flush against me. She let out a low, deep moan, a sound not of surprise but of profound pleasure, and it was swallowed by the roar of the shower. Before, I had seen her body. Now, I worshipped it. I knelt before her in the rushing water, my hands gripping her thighs. I buried my face in the soft, dark hair between her legs, my tongue finding the slick, secret center of her. She cried out, her fingers tangling violently in my hair, her hips bucking against my mouth. She tasted of heat and want and a dark female power that made me feel weak and strong at the same time. This wasn't just lust, it was a surrender. It was an act of absolute intimacy in a place of absolute betrayal. She pulled me up, her mouth finding mine in a deep, wet kiss. Her body was slick and hot against mine. She pushed me against the cool, tiled wall and wrapped her legs around my waist, guiding me inside her. The feeling of our slick bodies moving together, surrounded by the heat and the sound and the steam, was an exquisite sensory overload. The pleasure was sharper this time, more focused, a pure, distilled essence of our shared sin. Her moans were louder now, less inhibited, and I muffled them with my own mouth, our sounds mingling with the relentless rush of the water. When the climax came, it was not a frantic collision, but a deep, powerful, cresting wave that we rode together, holding on to each other as if we were the only two people left in the world. Afterward, we just stood there, leaning against each other, the water sluicing over our spent bodies. The steam began to clear. The mirror started to reveal our reflections, two pale, slick figures in the harsh light, and the reality of where we were began to settle in. We were in Olivia's shower. We were standing on the tile where she stood every morning. The bottles of her shampoo and conditioner were on the shelf beside us. The loofah she used hung on its hook. The sanctity of my marriage, of my most private space, had not just been breached, it had been drowned. The act, so deliberate and so satisfying, now felt like a deeper, more calculated evil. We had not made a mistake. We had made a choice. We had chosen to defile the temple. I turned off the water, and the sudden silence was more deafening than the roar had been. We stood dripping, cold, and utterly damned. If the first act was a frantic explosion, and the second a deliberate desecration, the days that followed were the beginning of a quiet, insidious cancer. The affair metastasized. It moved from the realm of the body to the realm of the mind, and in doing so became infinitely more dangerous. The raw, animal lust was still there, a constant, low-frequency hum beneath the surface of our lives, but it was now intertwined with something else, something I desperately tried to convince myself was a profound connection. It was the birth of the emotional affair, and its cradle was the ubiquitous, glowing screen of my phone. We lived a life of three, a bizarre and toxic trinity. To Olivia, we were a happy, temporary family, her loving husband and her beloved sister, all under one roof. But to Maya and me, the world was split into two realities. There was the public one, where we were brother and sister-in-law, making polite conversation over dinner, and then there was the secret one, a silent, encrypted world that existed in stolen glances, in the fractional pause before one of us left a room, and most of all, in the constant, secret stream of text messages that became our lifeline. It started simply. A text from her, sent from the guest room while I was in my office downstairs. "Are you okay?" 3 small words that carried an impossible weight of shared guilt and intimacy. My heart hammered against my ribs as I typed back, shielding my phone like a state secret. Number. "Are you?" This was our new language. The phone became a digital umbilical cord, a constant private conduit between us. The messages grew more frequent, more daring. We'd be sitting in the same room with Olivia, and my phone would vibrate in my pocket. A message from Maya. "Stop looking at me like that, she'll see." And a jolt of pure, terrifying adrenaline would shoot through me, a thrill so potent it was almost as good as the physical act itself. The risk was part of the addiction. Late at night became our sacred time. I would lie in bed, the warmth and familiar scent of my sleeping wife beside me, and I would exist in another world. Under the covers, the faint glow of my phone screen illuminating my face, I would talk to Maya. She was just down the hall, and yet we communicated across a digital universe of our own making. The conversations went deeper than any I'd had in years. I found myself telling her things I had never admitted to Olivia, not because I didn't love my wife, but because I didn't want to burden her perfect contentment with my own ambiguous melancholy. I told Maya about my secret fear that my best work was behind me, that the suburban library was the symbol of my surrender to comfortable mediocrity. I confessed that I sometimes felt like an actor, playing the part of a happy man, and she in turn confessed her own fears. She told me about the pressure of being the wild child, the secret loneliness that hid behind her stories of adventure, her deep-seated fear that she would never measure up to her perfect older sister. We were two damaged souls, confessing our sins and our sorrows in the digital dark. Each shared secret was a thread, and with hundreds of these threads, we wove a tapestry of intimacy so strong it felt unbreakable. We were no longer just two people who had slept together. We were allies. We were confidants. We were the only two people in the world who knew the truth. This, I now see, is how the mind justifies the body's betrayal. I began to construct a powerful, elaborate rationalization for my actions. This affair wasn't a sordid, selfish indulgence. It was a meeting of minds, a necessary connection that fed a part of my soul Olivia didn't even know existed. Olivia was my love, my life, my home. But Maya, I told myself, was my truth. She understood my darkness because she had her own. My wife, in her beautiful sunlit world, could not possibly comprehend the shadows I wrestled with. I began to see our affair as a form of self-preservation. I needed this secret world with Maya in order to survive the public one with Olivia. The delusion was intoxicating. I clung to it. One afternoon, Olivia came into my office, excited about a new restaurant she wanted to try for dinner. She was happy, simple, and pure. And as I looked at her, I felt a wave of profound alienation. Her contentment felt like a judgment on my own turmoil. After she left, the first thing I did was text Maya. I don't think she knows me at all. The lie was breathtaking in its arrogance. The truth was that Olivia knew the man I had promised to be, the man I had been. Maya only knew the fractured, compromised man I was becoming. The poison of this emotional affair began to seep into the foundations of my marriage. Without realizing it, I started to resent Olivia's happiness. Her stability, which I had once cherished as a gift, now felt like a lack of complexity. Her straightforward, uncomplicated love, which should have been my anchor, now felt simple. I was rewriting our history, recasting her as a character who couldn't understand me, all to justify my continued betrayal. I was poisoning the well from which I had drunk for 10 years, turning the purest water of my life into something I could no longer taste. The addiction was complete. It was no longer just about the thrill of sex, but about the constant validation of the emotional connection. I needed the texts. I needed the shared glances. I needed the secret world we had built because it was the only place where the man I had become made any sense. Lying in bed at night, the physical presence of my wife beside me became a mere formality. My real life, my true connection, was with the faint, glowing screen in my hand, my fingers typing words of false profundity to the woman down the hall, building our beautiful, rotten cathedral of lies, one text at a time. Familiarity breeds contempt, but in the case of our affair, it bred a dangerous carelessness. The constant, high-wire tension of the first few days had eased into a kind of arrogant routine. We had gotten away with the ultimate transgression, and with each passing day that our secret remained safe, we grew bolder. The stolen glances across the dinner table lasted a fraction of a second longer. The casual brushes of our hands as we reached for the same object in the kitchen became less accidental. Our text messages, once confined to the dead of night, now flew back and forth during the day, risky little sparks of electricity sent while Olivia was just in the next room, humming to herself as she folded laundry. We had constructed a fortress of lies, and we had started to believe it was impregnable. We were fools. We had mistaken the calm surface of Olivia's trust for a lack of perception, and in our hubris, we had forgotten that even the strongest fortress can be brought down by a single, misplaced stone. The universe, it seems, has a cruel way of reminding you just how fragile your manufactured reality is. The reminder came on a quiet Wednesday evening. The three of us were in the living room, a perfect portrait of domestic tranquility. A fire crackled in the hearth, warding off the persistent Seattle chill. Olivia was curled on her favorite armchair, lost in a novel. Maya was on the floor, leaning against the sofa, her laptop open as she browsed for flights, a search that had become performative and half-hearted. I was on the sofa, feigning interest in an architecture magazine, its glossy pages a shield for my wandering thoughts, which were, as always, on the woman sitting a few feet away from me. My phone was on the coffee table. That was the mistake. In my growing complacency, I had left it there, out in the open, instead of keeping it in my pocket, my usual paranoid custom. And then it happened. The phone buzzed, a loud, jarring sound in the quiet room. The screen lit up, a beacon in the dim light, and displayed on the screen, for anyone to see, was her name. Maya. Time seemed to warp, to stretch, and slow down. My entire consciousness narrowed to that glowing rectangle on the table. My blood turned to ice water. It was a call. She was calling me from 10 feet away. It was a mistake, a slip of her thumb, a catastrophic, idiotic accident. I saw Olivia look up from her book, her brow furrowed in mild curiosity. "Oh, honey, your phone," she said, her voice casual. She started to lean forward, her hand reaching out to pass it to me. It was a gesture she had made 1,000 times, an act of wifely helpfulness. But in that moment, it was the hand of God reaching down to detonate my world. A primal scream of pure, animal panic rose in my throat. I had to get to that phone before she did. I lunged, a clumsy, desperate movement knocking the magazine from my lap. "I've got it," I said, my voice strained, grabbing the phone just as her fingers were about to touch it. I jabbed the silence button, killing the ringing and the glowing screen. But it was too late. I knew it was too late. I looked up, my heart hammering like a drum solo against my ribs. Olivia was looking at me, then at Maya, then back at me. Her expression was not angry or suspicious. It was something far worse. It was purely, innocently confused. "Why is Maya calling you?" she asked, her head tilted slightly. "She's right here." The question was so simple, so logical, it was unanswerable. It was a perfect, elegant checkmate. The air solidified. The crackling of the fire seemed to fade away. I saw Maya freeze, her eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming truck. This was it, the end, the moment of reckoning. In that split second of suffocating silence, my mind, fueled by sheer, desperate adrenaline, began to race. Denial was impossible. I needed a new reality. I needed a lie so complete, so detailed, that it would overwrite the absurd truth of the moment. I forced a short, dismissive laugh, a sound that felt like it was scraped from the bottom of a barrel. "Oh, that," I said, waving my hand as if swatting away a fly. "That's not her. That's the garage." I saw a flicker of deeper confusion in Olivia's eyes. I had to build faster. Mark's Auto Repair. I saved the mechanic's number in my phone as Maya's car so I wouldn't forget who I was calling about. He was supposed to call me today with an update on the new alternator he had to order. The lie was taking shape, intricate and plausible. I could feel Maya's gaze on me, feel her willing me to succeed. "He's a bit disorganized," I continued, embellishing now, adding the details that would sell the fiction. "He probably just wrote 'call about Maya's car' on his schedule, and his office phone system must be picking up her name from the note. Weird." I shook my head, a little performance of technological annoyance. To seal it, I knew I had to go one step further. With a hand that was remarkably steady, I pretended to call back. I held the phone to my ear, listening to the dial tone, and put on a one-sided conversation. "Hey, Mark? Ethan here. Yeah, just saw you called. Oh, still on back order? Damn. Okay, no problem. Just let me know when it's in, thanks." I hung up and tossed the phone onto the sofa cushion beside me with an air of frustration. "Still not in," I announced to the room. "Might be another couple of days." I looked at Olivia. Her face had cleared. The confusion was gone, replaced by sympathy. "Oh, that's so annoying for her," she said, glancing at her sister. "Don't worry, Maya. You can stay as long as you need." Maya mumbled a thank you, her voice barely a whisper. The crisis was over. The bomb had been defused. Olivia, in her infinite, heartbreaking trust, had accepted my story. She returned to her book. But the adrenaline that had coursed through my veins drained away, leaving me weak, shaky, and nauseated. I had done it. I had stared into the abyss of discovery and had lied my way back, but the victory felt like a terminal diagnosis. The near miss had shattered our foolish confidence, replacing it with a cold, constant paranoia. We were no longer careless. We were trapped. And later that night, as we were getting ready for bed, Olivia looked at me with a strange, lingering expression. It was probably nothing. It was probably just my own guilt, being projected onto her innocent face. But for the first time, I wondered, had a tiny, hairline crack appeared in the foundation of her trust? The web of lies had held, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it was only a matter of time before one of the threads finally snapped. The near miss with the phone call changed everything. The reckless, arrogant confidence we had built was shattered, replaced by a cold, brittle paranoia. The air in the house grew thick with things unsaid, and the final days of Maya's stay felt less like a visit and more like a countdown to a detonation. The mechanic, a real person I had to actually call to legitimize my lie, finally fixed the car. There were no more excuses. Her departure was a hard, unavoidable fact, scheduled for Saturday morning. A strange mixture of dread and relief settled over me. Relief that this constant, high-stakes performance would finally be over. Dread at the thought of the silence she would leave behind, a silence that I knew would be filled with the ghosts of everything we had done. The thrill of the affair was gone, bled out by the constant fear of discovery. In its place was something much uglier, a raw, desperate need. It was the frantic craving of an addict staring at his last dose, knowing that after this, there was only the long, bleak emptiness of withdrawal. On that final morning, I offered to drive with her for the first few miles, just to make sure the car ran smoothly on the highway. It was a flimsy excuse, a transparently sentimental gesture. But Olivia, in her endless capacity for seeing the best in people, saw only a caring brother-in-law being kind to her departing sister. "That's so sweet of you, honey," she said, giving me a kiss as we stood by the door. "You two have fun." The innocence of her words, the casual "you two," felt like a deliberate, twisting stab from a cruel god. Maya and I walked to the car in near silence, the space between us charged with a palpable, frantic energy. This was our last chance to be alone, a final stolen hour sanctioned by the very woman we were betraying. The transaction was so sick, so twisted, it made me want to vomit, but it didn't stop me. Nothing could have stopped me. We drove. The car, now in perfect working order, hummed along the highway, carrying us away from my home, my life. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. Our secret language of texts and glances had been exhausted. All that was left was the screaming silence and the knowledge that our time was running out. I looked over at her. She was staring out the window, her reflection, a ghostly image against the passing green of the Pacific Northwest. I saw the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers were tightly laced together in her lap. After 10 miles, I took an exit, leaving the highway for a winding secondary road that led toward the coast. I was driving without a destination, seeking only solitude. I found it on a deserted gravel pull-off, a muddy patch of land overlooking the gray, churning waters of the Puget Sound. The sky was the color of lead, and a cold wind whipped against the car. It was a desolate, beautiful, and utterly hopeless landscape. It was a perfect reflection of my soul. I killed the engine. The only sound was the howling of the wind and our own shallow breathing. This time, there was no slow build, no seductive dance. There was only a shared, mutual despair. I turned to her, and she turned to me. Her eyes were dark, and I saw tears glistening on her lower lashes. That sight, the sight of her pain, should have been a brake. Instead, it was an accelerator. It was a confirmation of our shared damnation. In a sudden, violent movement, I unbuckled my seatbelt and pulled her toward me. It was a clumsy, desperate act, a struggle across the center console that separated us. She met me halfway, her mouth crashing against mine, her hands grabbing at my jacket. This wasn't a kiss. It was an attempt at annihilation. We were two drowning people clinging to each other, pulling each other further under the water. The cramped confines of the car turned our desperation into a brutal, awkward wrestling match. I fumbled with the buttons of her coat. She struggled with the buckle of my belt. The windows began to fog, trapping us in our own humid, sordid bubble, erasing the bleak world outside. I pushed her back against the passenger seat, climbing over the console, my knee knocking hard against the gear shift. The position was awkward, unsustainable, and profoundly uncomfortable. And it didn't matter. The discomfort was part of it. The pain was part of it. I ripped her jeans open, the sound of the zipper a harsh, violent slash in the quiet. I pushed into her, and her cry was not one of pleasure, but a raw, guttural sob that she muffled against my shoulder. We moved together in a grinding, punishing rhythm, driven by something far beyond lust. This was an exorcism. We were trying to fuck the guilt out of each other. We were trying to use friction and heat to burn away the memory of Olivia's trusting face. I looked down at Maya, her own face streaked with tears, her eyes squeezed shut, her teeth biting into her lower lip. The sight of her anguish mixed with her pleasure was the most tragic and intoxicating thing I had ever seen. I could feel my own tears, hot and shameful, burning my eyes as I moved inside her. The sounds were not the sounds of love, or even of lust. They were the sounds of desperation. The squeak of the car's suspension, the harsh, ragged gasps for air, the wet, slapping sound of our skin, the choked, sobbing whimpers that were the only language we had left. The climax was not a release, it was a rupture. A hollow, shuddering spasm that left us both utterly broken and empty, clinging to each other in the cold, silent car. The passion had finally, violently, burned itself out, and all that was left was the ash. The drive back was a journey through a silent gray hell. We didn't speak. There were no tears, no apologies, no whispered plans for the future. The final, brutal act in the car had scoured everything clean, leaving behind only the raw, exposed nerves of our shared shame. We had said everything, and we had said nothing. I drove with a mechanical precision, my eyes fixed on the road, while Maya sat staring out her window, a stranger I had known with biblical, ruinous intimacy. When we pulled into my driveway, Olivia was waiting on the porch, a welcoming smile on her face that was a beacon of a life I no longer deserved. The goodbye was a masterpiece of polite fiction. Olivia hugged her sister for a long time, whispering things I couldn't hear, her love for Maya pure and unconditional. I stood back, a pillar of fraudulent support. Then it was my turn. Maya and I faced each other. We didn't touch. We couldn't. A simple handshake would have felt like a lie, and a hug would have been an unbearable sacrilege. Our eyes met for one final fleeting second, and in that look, we exchanged a lifetime of guilt, a silent acknowledgement of the wreckage we had made. "Drive safe," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. She just nodded, her face pale and drawn, before getting into her car without a backward glance. We watched, Olivia and I, as she drove down the street and turned the corner, disappearing from our lives forever. The sound of her engine faded, and in its place, a silence descended, so vast and so absolute that I felt I could drown in it. Her absence was not an emptiness, it was a presence, a heavy, suffocating presence that filled every corner of the house. The quiet that I had once found so stifling now seemed like a lost paradise. This new silence was different. It was accusatory. It was loud. For the next few days, I became a ghost in my own home, haunted by the memory of her at every turn. I would walk into the guest room, now pristine and sterile, the bed made with crisp, clean sheets, and I could still smell her perfume on the air, a phantom scent that made my stomach clench. I'd pass the living room sofa, and my eyes would involuntarily be drawn to the cushions where we had first fallen. The memory so vivid, it was like a photograph burned onto my retinas. The kitchen island, the master bathroom, they were no longer just parts of my house. They were memorials to my sin, each one a separate, distinct chapter in the story of my downfall. I was living in a museum of my own betrayal. Olivia, in her gentle way, tried to bridge the distance that had opened between us. She attributed my sullen silence to the post-visit blues, the natural letdown after the excitement of having family stay. She didn't see the rot. She just saw a husband who was a little down. The true unraveling, the real beginning of my sentence, happened in the one place that had always been our sanctuary, our bed. The intimacy I had shared with Olivia, the comfortable, easy affection that had been the bedrock of our marriage for a decade, was gone. It had been contaminated, poisoned by my actions. One night, a few days after Maya had left, Olivia turned to me in the dark. She began to trace the lines on my chest with her finger, a familiar, loving gesture that had always soothed me. But this time, my skin crawled. Her touch did not feel like her touch. It felt like a memory and an accusation. My senses had become traitors. When she kissed me, my mind, a cruel and twisted projectionist, superimposed an image of Maya's mouth, her taste, the memory of her desperate wine-stained lips. I pulled back, feigning a sudden wave of exhaustion. The lie was clumsy, the excuse thin, and I saw a flicker of hurt in Olivia's eyes before she turned away. Another night, she pressed her body against mine, her familiar curves fitting against me as they always had. But my hands, when I reached for her, did not know her. My hands remembered a different waist, a different curve of a hip, a different weight and texture. I was touching my wife, the woman I loved, but I was feeling her sister. The psychological torment was absolute. I was a man haunted by a ghost that only I could see, a ghost that had taken up residence in my own marriage bed. I was trapped in a nightmare where my love for my wife and my memory of my sin were inextricably, horribly fused. The sharp, stabbing panic of the affair, the adrenaline of the near misses, and the thrill of the illicit acts had faded. What remained was far worse. It was a chronic condition, a permanent, low-grade fever of guilt that I knew would never break. It was a dull, constant ache in the center of my chest that was there when I woke up, and there when I failed to fall asleep. It was the sour taste of self-loathing that tainted every meal. It was the dissonance of hearing Olivia call me a good man, a loving husband, while the echoes of my own depravity screamed in my ears. I went to work. I designed buildings. I had conversations. I smiled. I performed the mechanics of my life with a hollow, terrifying precision. I had become a shell, an expertly crafted automaton of the man I used to be. The foundation of my life, the one I had so carefully and proudly built with Olivia, was rotten from the core. I had invited a termite into my home, and it had eaten me from the inside out. I would look at Olivia, laughing at something on television, her face so open and full of light, and I would feel nothing but the profound, dark chasm that now separated us. She was living in the house we had built, while I was already buried in the tomb I had dug for myself beneath it. The affair was over. The punishment was just beginning. The seasons turned. Autumn bled into a long, gray winter, which eventually gave way to a spring that I observed but did not feel. More than a year has passed since Maya drove away, since the silence in our house became a permanent resident. From the outside, the portrait of our life remains unchanged. The lawn is manicured, the windows are clean, my designs continue to win modest acclaim, and Olivia still hosts elegant, effortless dinner parties where our friends praise our beautiful home and our enduring love. We are a photograph in a silver frame, a perfect, glossy image of happiness. But if you were to press your ear to that photograph, you would hear nothing, not a heartbeat, not a breath, just the hollow echo of a life that has already ended. The secret is safe. I have carried the weight of it every single day, and my reward for this vigilance is this beautiful, sunlit tomb where I now reside. The haunting is not what I would have imagined. There are no dramatic, spectral visitations. The ghost of what I did, the ghost of Maya, is quieter, more insidious. She is a filter that has been permanently placed over my senses. I will catch a scent of a certain type of floral perfume on a stranger in the grocery store, and for a moment, I am back in the guest room, my stomach clenching with the memory of guilt and desire. I will see a woman with a certain kind of untamed dark hair, and my heart will give a painful, traitorous lurch. I have systematically purged my life of the triggers I can control. I avoid the brand of wine we drank that night. I change the station when a certain slow, melancholic song comes on the radio. The guest room door stays permanently closed. But the affair is no longer just a collection of memories. It has become a part of my cellular structure, a chronic illness of the soul. There has been no contact, no late-night calls, no desperate emails, no accidental encounters. We have successfully, completely, excised each other from our lives. She is a ghost to me, and I assume, am a ghost to her. Two specters who once collided with world-shattering force, now condemned to haunt our separate, silent worlds. The true cost, the daily payment on my infinite debt, is Olivia. The wall between us is no longer a fresh construction of awkward silences. It is a vast, unbreachable mountain range. It is made of every "I'm fine" I've uttered when I was screaming inside, every "just tired" I've used to explain my distance, every touch I've failed to return with genuine warmth. She knows something is wrong. She is not a fool, but her love for me is so vast, her trust so deeply ingrained, that her mind seeks out logical, forgivable reasons for my change. She thinks it's stress at work, or a midlife melancholy, or perhaps even a quiet resentment I hold toward her for a reason she can't decipher. She has tried, with a heartbreaking, gentle persistence, to reach me. She suggests therapy, vacations, new hobbies. She listens with patient love as I speak of deadlines and demanding clients, never knowing that the true source of my malaise is sitting right there beside her, poisoning the very air she breathes. I cannot tell her. That is the core of my damnation. To confess would be to destroy her, to obliterate the radiant, trusting woman I fell in love with. It would be an act of ultimate cruelty, a selfish need for my own absolution at the cost of her entire world. And so, to protect her from the truth, I sentence her to a life with a ghost. I condemn her to a marriage devoid of the intimacy she deserves. It is a choice between two hells, and I have chosen the quieter, slower burning one. Tonight, a fire is crackling in the hearth, just as it did on the night of the party. The cycle is complete. I am sitting in my armchair, watching the flames, a glass of whiskey in my hand. Olivia is on the sofa, the same sofa, reading a book. The scene is one of peace, of deep marital comfort. She looks up, sensing my gaze, and she gives me a smile. It's the same smile. The one from our first date, the one from our wedding day, the one from the night I shattered our lives. It is a smile of pure, untainted love, a relic from a time before the fall. It is the most beautiful and painful thing I have ever seen. I try to smile back. I command the muscles in my face to move, to form the shape of happiness, to return the gift she is so freely giving me. But they do not obey. The mask of the contented husband is too heavy tonight. I can only look at her, my face a barren landscape of regret. She holds my gaze for a moment, her own smile faltering slightly with a familiar, quiet confusion, before she returns to her book. And I am left to wonder, what is the true nature of a life sentence? It is not a dramatic final judgment. It is the endless, repeating loop of a quiet evening like this one. It is the punishment of being granted everything you ever wanted, and knowing you are the one who turned it all to dust. A single choice, a single night, does not just create a memory. It creates a future. And mine, I now know, is this. A quiet room, a loving wife I can never truly hold again, and an eternity of silence to contemplate the echo of what I have done.